Welcome back to Dreamtime Documents. Tonight we descend into one of modern history's most tangled, tragic, and consequential rivalries, the story of the United States and Iran, two nations that once shared military secrets, billions in arms, and the quiet confidence of allies now stand as bitter adversaries whose clashes have redrawn maps, toppled governments, and brought the world to the brink of wider war. This is not a tale of cartoon villains and flawless heroes. It is a story of power, pride, ideology, betrayal, and consequences that still echo in the headlines of 2026. To grasp where we stand today, we must travel far beyond the burning flags of 1979. We must return to the moment when Washington and Tehran were not enemies but partners. When the Shah dined at the White House, American advisors strolled Tehran's streets, and the two countries' fates felt inseparably linked. That alliance did not simply unravel, it was dismantled, piece by careful piece, through decades of miscalculation, arrogance, and willful blindness. Until one November morning in 1979, the entire edifice collapsed in a spectacle the world has never forgotten. So let us begin at the beginning, in the oil fields, on the Cold War chessboard, and in the smoke-filled rooms where decisions were made that would thunder across generations. Iran is one of civilization's oldest cradles. Long before America existed, Persia under Cyrus the Great stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, building libraries, while much of the world still lived by campfire light. By the early 20th century, however, that proud inheritance had been reduced to a pawn. Tsarist Russia pressed from the north, the British Empire from the south. Both coveted Iran's geography and, after 1908, its black gold. When the Anglo-Persian oil companies struck oil in Khuzestan, Britain quickly made itself majority shareholder. Iranian workers drilled Iranian oil, yet the vast profits flowed to London. Iranians lived in poverty, while British managers enjoyed swimming pools and cricket pitches in the shadow of the world's largest refinery at Abadan. Resentment took root and would one day bloom into fury. Into this wounded landscape stepped America, not as colonizer but as counterweight. Americans like Howard Baskerville, who died fighting for Iran's 1907 constitutional revolution, and financial advisor Morgan Schuster, who came to help rather than plunder, earned genuine goodwill. The United States had no colonial record here, no oil concessions, no troops on Iranian soil. For many Iranians, America represented the fairer power. That image would not survive the Cold War. At the center of the coming alliance stood Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah. He ascended the Peacock throne in 1941, not by popular will, but because British and Soviet forces deposed his pro-Nazi father and installed the 21-year-old son they believed would be pliable. Educated in Switzerland, fluent in several languages, and genuinely eager to modernize Iran, the young Shah was also insecure, haunted by the knowledge that he had inherited rather than earned his crown. He craved American respect above almost everything. For the first decade of his reign, power was shared with a functioning parliament and a charismatic nationalist prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh. In 1951, Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry. The move was wildly popular inside Iran. In London and increasingly Washington, it was seen as dangerous. The Truman administration initially sympathized with Iran's grievances, but Eisenhower's arrival in 1953 changed everything. British intelligence framed Mossadegh as a communist gateway. The CIA, led by Kermit Roosevelt Jr., took their plan, renamed Operation Ajax, and executed a textbook covert coup. Bribes, planted propaganda, staged riots, paid mobs. On August 19, 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah, who had fled in panic, returned triumphant. The CIA did not acknowledge its role until 2013. By then, the lesson had been seared into Iranian memory. When democracy threatened American interests, America would crush it. The elected hero was replaced by a king whose throne now rested on foreign steel. That was the original sin. Everything that followed flowed from it. With Mossadegh gone, the alliance entered its golden transactional age. America gained oil access, a bulwark against Soviet expansion, and a reliable partner. The Shah received weapons, intelligence, money, and legitimacy. In 1957, with CIA and Israeli help, he created SAVAK, his feared secret police. Political prisoners were tortured by the thousands. Amnesty International called the regime one of the world's worst human rights violators. America knew and mostly looked away. The strategic relationship was too valuable. Flush with post 1973 oil wealth, the Shah bought $16 billion in U.S. arms in just 5 years. F-14 Tomcats, destroyers, the most advanced hardware available. He styled himself policeman of the Gulf. Meanwhile, in Tehran's mosques and universities, a different future was quietly taking shape. The Shah's White Revolution brought land reform, women's suffrage, and gleaming skyscrapers, but it was imposed from above. Traditional merchants were squeezed, the Shia clergy marginalized, and oil wealth bred grotesque inequality. In 1964, the Shah granted U.S. military personnel legal immunity on Iranian soil. A fiery cleric in Qum named Ruhollah Khomeini denounced it as colonial humiliation. He was exiled, but his sermons on smuggled cassette tapes continued to spread. By 1978, mass protests erupted. The Shah's forces fired on crowds, creating cycles of mourning and rage. American intelligence failed spectacularly. A CIA report in August 1978 insisted Iran was not in a revolutionary situation. On January 16, 1979, the Shah fled. On February 1, Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome of millions. The Islamic Revolution had triumphed. The architecture America had built over 26 years crumbled overnight. The new Islamic Republic was not monolithic, and some on both sides hoped for a managed transition. That hope died in October 1979, when the dying Shah was admitted to the United States for medical treatment. Iranians saw history repeating, America sheltering its client so he could be restored. On November 4th, student militants seized the U.S. Embassy and took 66 Americans hostage. Khomeini endorsed the act. The 444-day crisis consumed Jimmy Carter's presidency. A rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, ended in fiery disaster in the desert. The hostages were released on January 20, 1981, the exact minute Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. The symbolism was deliberate. The 1980s produced surreal contradictions. When Iraq invaded Iran in 1980, the United States quietly backed Saddam Hussein with intelligence, satellite imagery, and economic aid, knowing Iraq was using chemical weapons against Iranian troops. Yet at the same moment, the Reagan administration secretly sold arms to Iran in hopes of freeing American hostages in Lebanon, Profits were diverted to fund the Nicaraguan Contras. The Iran-Contra scandal nearly destroyed Reagan's presidency and proved that, beneath the rhetoric, policy was driven by cold calculation. On July 30, 1988, the USS Vincennes mistook Iran Air Flight 655 for a fighter jet and shot it down over the Persian Gulf, killing all 290 civilians aboard, including 66 children. The United States called it a defensive action, expressed regret, paid compensation years later without admitting legal fault, and awarded the captain a medal. In Iran, the tragedy is remembered every year. For many Iranians, it crystallized a bitter truth. Their lives were treated as acceptable collateral. Ironically, America helped launch Iran's nuclear program under the Shah. After the revolution, it was shelved, then quietly revived in the 1980s, partly in response to Iraq's chemical attacks. By 2002, the world discovered undeclared enrichment facilities. Years of crisis diplomacy produced the 2015 JCPOA. Iran curbed its program, submitted to rigorous inspections. The West lifted sanctions. Breakout time to weapons-grade material stretched from weeks to over a year. Critics on both sides called it flawed. In 2018, President Trump withdrew. The cycle resumed. Trump's first-term maximum pressure campaign reimposed crippling sanctions. In January 2020, the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad. Iran retaliated with missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq. Both sides calibrated to avoid all-out war, yet each round narrowed the margin for error. Unable to match U.S. conventional power, Iran built strategic depth through allies and proxies: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. These forces could bleed American interests without presenting a clear target. The strategy proved costly to all sides. By 2025-2026, many of those proxies had been significantly degraded. Beneath the geopolitics are the people. Iran's population today numbers roughly 88 million, still young but aging. Millions have known only sanctions, currency collapse, and restricted futures. The Iranian diaspora in the United States is large and complex. Many love their homeland while opposing its government. On the American side, the costs have been measured in trillions spent, lives lost in complicated wars, and attention diverted from other global challenges. Ordinary Iranians and ordinary Americans have paid the steepest price for decisions made in distant capitals. In February 2025, back in office, President Trump signed a national security presidential memorandum, restoring maximum pressure with renewed ferocity. Indirect talks began in April in Oman. Progress was halting. Iran insisted on retaining domestic enrichment. The United States demanded stricter limits and broader concessions. In June 2025, with the deadline unmet, Israel launched the 12-day war, striking Iranian nuclear and military sites. The United States followed with Operation Midnight Hammer on June 22, B-2 bombers and Tomahawk missiles hitting Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. U.S. officials declared the facilities obliterated. Independent assessments describe severe damage and a multi-year setback to Iran's nuclear ambitions, though the location of Iran's stockpile of near-weapons-grade uranium remains partly uncertain and some underground infrastructure proved resilient. Further escalation followed into early 2026, including additional strikes and the reported death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. As of April 2026, a fragile 2 week ceasefire has just been agreed. The Strait of Hormuz has reopened. New talks are reportedly in motion. Iran's nuclear program has been badly damaged but not erased. The technical know how, some hidden sites, and the memory of repeated attacks remain. The threshold has not been crossed, yet the shadow is darker than ever. Why has this conflict proven so intractable? For the Islamic Republic, hostility toward America is not policy, it is identity. The regime was born in explicit opposition to what it called the Great Satan. Normalization would require rewriting its own founding myth. For the United States, the 444-day hostage crisis left an unhealed scar. Decades of Iranian-backed attacks on American forces and allies, combined with domestic politics that punish perceived weakness, have hardened positions. Add genuine security threats, ballistic missiles, proxy violence, a nuclear program that keeps advancing, and the loop becomes self-reinforcing. Each side's action justifies the other's. Neither can step back without appearing to surrender. History is full of turning points we missed. Had the United States not toppled Mossadegh in 1953, Iran might have become a stable democracy. Had Carter refused the Shah medical entry in 1979, the embassy seizure might have been avoided. Had America stayed neutral in the Iran-Iraq war, Iranian grievances might have been less visceral. Each missed off-ramp narrowed the path. Today, in April 2026, we stand at another crossroads. The latest ceasefire and renewed talks offer a narrow window. Diplomacy remains possible, transactional, limited, imperfect, but possible. Military options carry catastrophic risks: regional war, oil shock, proliferation across the Middle East. The human cost of continued failure is measured in stunted lives, grieving families, and futures deferred. The shopkeeper in Tehran watching savings evaporate. The American service member facing Iranian-supplied weapons. The children who never came home from Flight 655. The hostages who counted 444 sunsets. None of them chose this enmity. They simply lived inside its consequences. The real story of USP Mainan relations is ultimately a story about power's long shadow and history's unforgiving memory. Two nations bound together by geography, oil, and grievance, yet still somehow capable of choosing something wiser if courage and imagination can prevail. Understanding the past is the first, indispensable step toward imagining something better. If this story moved you, made you think, or changed how you see the world, please like, subscribe, and join us next time on Dreamtime Documents. There is always more history waiting to be uncovered. Good night.